Hi, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I can still see some attendees joining, so hopefully we'll have a couple of more people joining us. But I just wanted to give a couple of housekeeping remarks before Professor Kurt Balling takes over today. Wanted to welcome you all to the fifth webinar in the Middlesex in Conversation series. We're very happy to have you with us today. My name is Mina Baljagic. I work with the environmental team. And just wanted to let you know a couple of things. The session, as you've seen, is being recorded. For everyone who's missed it, it will be available on the university corporate webpage under the sustainability site. So if anyone's missed it, please do let them know they can see it there. If you can please keep the chat and the Q&A separate. You can see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button and a chat button. We'll keep an eye on the Q&A just so nothing gets missed. And if you are going to attend any of our next webinars that we'll be hosting, if you can please make sure that you're on time so that everything can run smoothly. As I said, this is our fifth webinar. It is the From Vision to Action, how creative industries propel the SDGs. And we have a panel full of experts hoping to engage students with the SDGs through pedagogy. So Professor Kurt Balling, if you'd take over, please, and hope everyone enjoys it today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sustainability. Well, Middlesex has made it its business to try and ensure that sustainability is embedded in its strategy. It's one of the three pillars of the strategy, others being well-being and the creation of good business, and sustainability is a third. But of course, sustainability runs through the curriculum right across the university. In each year, the university has to try and ensure that we reflect what we do in a report that we submit to the relevant interested parties. Link to that report, annual report, last year's annual report, is in the chat for you to look at if you haven't already looked at it, and the new report will be out shortly, which gives a fair reflection of what happens across the university. But today we are going to be looking particularly at how in arts and creative industries we try and interpret that idea of ensuring that sustainability is reflected in our pedagogy. And in order to do that, we've got Dr. Helen Bendon, who is the interim head of the film school, who works with students in lots of collaborations with the local authority, looking to advocacy and change. We've got Dr. Lorraine Leeson, who's a professor of, I think, arts and social practice. I can't remember your exact title, Rain, but obviously all-round great professor of the arts, and with Dr. Vesna Lukic, who is a documentary filmmaker and has done some recent projects, which we'll hear about shortly, with members of the Barnet community involving our students. If I can have those, if I can have the slides up, please. Can that be organized for me, Christiana? As if by magic, and if we can go to the slideshow, that'll be lovely. Oh, perfect. Oh my goodness, I wish everything always worked so smoothly. So as you can see, the panel there on the left, and how creative arts can propel the SDGs. What is it that the creative arts can do in order to propagate and stimulate engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN? As you can see, there's a little graphic that I've worked up this morning, which kind of takes you through the kind of interactions you can expect in the arts and creative practices space. Visual arts, theatre and performance, dance and movement, music, film and media, literature and poetry, all of those in some ways are going to be reflected in the talks from our three important guests today. And obviously what we're looking at is impact through the creative arts, raising awareness, advocacy, ensuring cultural transformations, and ensuring that the engagement that we do have is inclusive. Next slide, please, Christiana. Can we do the next slide, Christiana, or do I need to do it? Let me see if I can do it. No, I
So
can't.
sorry, it's Helen that's helping.
Oh, Helen.
I'm not sure.
So sorry, Helen's got two hats on today. Helen, can you forward that to the next slide? Are you able to do that? To me,
Yeah,
like the
I mean, it's done on my screen. Are you not seeing it?
I'm not seeing it now. Okay, no problem.
Let me just see if I can.
I'm still seeing slide 1.
Okay, mine has moved forward weirdly. Let me stop and start again.
Okay. I believe we're getting rid of Zoom, aren't we, at the end of the June? Maybe this is one of the reasons why we're getting rid of Zoom.
It's got into a muddle here. I don't know, Vesna, whether you're able to pick it up. I'll try one more time.
I see something coming up now.
Has that worked?
Yes, but I wonder, do you want to try and change the slides? Just see whether it goes back and forth. Can you go back and forth in the presentation?
That worked?
That's
Towards-
worked, yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the second slide. Excellent. So, second slide, guests, we have a selection of the sustainable goals here, which we believe in ACI, we primarily address. I mean, in some ways, you could probably make an argument that we address all of them, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on today: SD 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 13, 16, and 17. And as you can see, that's a really strong range. On the graphic, you'll see we make the point that the goals are interconnected. Progress in one goal contributes to progress in others. And in that way, you kind of create a network of sustainable development. And that's the whole idea of the sustainable development goals, that actually there's a holistic approach to ensuring that these goals can be met. Next slide, please, Helen. So, Dr. Helen Bendon is now going to give us a rendition of the kind of work that she's been doing with students. And you'll notice on each slide that we have tried to indicate which sustainable development goals are being addressed through that work. So next slide, Helen, and over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kurt. So yes, my name's Helen Bendon, and along with my colleague Ben Serlin, I lead something called Changing the Culture at Middlesex University, which is our university-wide commitment to addressing violence against women and girls, harassment and hate crime through both responses and preventative measures. Really brief overview of CCI, Changing the Culture. We are very much kind of responding to guidance and recommendations. So we look, for example, at what's happening for the Office for Students, for Universities UK, and try and embed that into policy and process. But the other part of that is making sure that we are engaging our student community in those issues. So our principles with how we work are to be very agile, to be responsive to issues that come up for students, and be really action focused. That's really important. I think policies and processes are massively important, but actually how it changes the culture, which is why we're called what we're called, is the bigger piece for me. It's difficult to measure and it's difficult to work with, but unless we're engaging with our students and partnering with people, then the whole thing is feels pretty much disconnected from them. So just very briefly, we're going to share a few projects with you from all three of us will do that. So you can see what this looks like on the ground. So we're just not talking about it in abstract terms. I think it's really helpful to imagine the kind of work that we do, but also because we're visual thinkers, that's super important. This at the heart of our projects is co-creation. So engaging young people and creating powerful campaign narratives, looking at a range of social justice agendas. In the example that I'm showing you now is part of a body of work called Hear My Voice that looks at addressing violence against women and girls. It's a recent collaboration with the local authority, Barnet Council, with our students, with secondary schools and support and report providers around the borough. And very much for us about the power of young people's voice in contributing towards positive change. This particular project, which was part of a suite of work that we did last summer, it's called A Walk in the Park. And this project came out of conversations that my colleague Nicola Stammers had been having with her students about perceptions of safety in the local parks in and around the university. And so she worked with her students to devise a theatre piece that was very hard hitting, based in our theatre at Middlesex, very hard hitting performance around women's safety, and used a huge amount of data from records around how safe women feel when they're outside, and the issues, particularly in the wake of the death of Sarah Everard, around how protected people feel in external spaces. After the performance, we then did a dusk walk where we shared stories between us and came together in space in Sunny Hill Park to share reflections. It's a very, very different approach to, for example, community forums. And to be in a situation where we had creative practitioners, local police, safe streets teams, actually in direct dialogue with each other was incredibly powerful. And I think sometimes when communications are very antagonistic between different groups, actually to be in this forum is a really good example of how the creative arts can break down some of those barriers. Another example I'm just going to show you here is the work of some of our graphic students, Claire Barth and Fuat Hassan, who made this incredible infographics around everyday misogyny. We've embedded teaching and learning and assessment on misogyny, violence against women and girls, and domestic violence across a range of curricula to support our students to use their voice and their creativity to contribute culture change in a variety of settings. When we try and embed these things, I think it's really important to say we're not asking our colleagues to do extra things. We're asking them to look at where there are possibilities to embed this agenda into briefs. And then Ben and I will work with those staffs to make sure that they have the tools that they need, the report and support services that they might need to help with the safeguarding of the production of the work. And then they're producing this incredibly innovative work. This is an example of really interesting practice that happened out of a dialogue between the men and the women on the course. And when the women started sharing some of their experiences, Fuat, who worked on this project, said, you know, I had no idea, you know, it made me realize as a man just how little I have to think about this. And so just changing one perspective and actually helping to articulate an empathetic and holistic way of addressing these issues that isn't just down to women to solve was a really kind of rewarding aspect of this work. Okay, This slide just demonstrates how we are engaging with partners in different ways. First image on the left is us working with some of the film students with local outreach projects. One of the issues around tackling misogyny with young men is something that we do a lot of as part of changing the culture. But our experience has shown us that peer influence is obviously much more effective than one-off interactions that we might have doing schools outreach work. So this was a workshop that I led with my colleagues on the film programme, in which we taught young boys how to interview. So how to prepare questions, how to actively listen, and how to do the technical recording. And they asked each other questions about misogyny and the kind of online influences they had. And I can tell you that they answer questions very differently when they're asked of each other than if I had have asked them, or their teachers or their parents would have asked them. So it's that kind of co-production that I think is super important. This top right image here is Claire and Fuat and some of the other graphic students talking to our local MP, David Pinto-Jashinsky. When he found out what we were doing, he asked to come and be part of a discussion with the students. And it's just fantastic to see opportunities of how our students' voice can genuinely be heard on a political stage, and just how actively our local partners in government are interested in hearing from them. And here in the bottom, you can see Claire and Fuat, who presented their work as part of 16 days of activism. So their work was featured on bus stops across the borough for 16 days of activism. So a brief that's set as part of their teaching and learning then gets them in a public forum where they're talking to local government, and their work is put across the borough, influencing our local community and signposting the resources that's available. Finally, this is an example of some schools outreach. And again, you can see this isn't just about film. This is about how we work together as a faculty. We collaborated again with the graphics team on this. And also with some of our colleagues in business and law. So we started this day looking at some baseline data. So the students who came to visit did a survey about what their views were. They did some workshops with Ben and I about toxic masculinity and online influencers, and did a lot of discussion. And then the graphics team took over and helped them create messages. The campaign was called "It's Not Okay." And they made these placards, and it was probably one of the most rewarding bits of outreach I've ever done, where you get a group of students who leave the campus with their placards held high, boys and girls together, with anti-misogyny and anti-violence against women and girls messages. I think as a piece of outreach, we were completely booked out within 3 days, which doesn't happen a lot. The need to do this and to work with schools is super, super important, and the demand is very much there. So this is just a kind of little snapshot of some of the things that we're doing to co-create with local schools, local government, and putting our students very much at the centre of this kind of work. And now I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Lorraine.
Next slide, thank you.
Thank you. Could you go on to the next slide, please, Helen, which is just the introductory slide. But I just want to say I'm going to show some research projects, but there is no reason why this research shouldn't be the basis of how we teach these approaches to our students. Not only can we involve students in the research projects, but we can also teach them some of the approaches, some of the skills that go beyond the creative skills that you need to work in this way. And in fine art, we have actually had a long tradition of doing this through undergraduate modules in art practice in the community, and we also had a dedicated MA in art and social practice for a while. You can do it to some extent with placements, but the problem with placements, they're more like work experience. So although you can introduce these ideas early on to students, and they can get some experience of outreach through their through doing a placement. In fact, I think we need more dedicated courses which actually concentrate on these skills for those who really want to use their creative practice to make a difference. Have the next slide, please. So one project that I'm going to show is, you know, art is a powerful tool. And although it's a powerful tool, I don't think you can make change by art itself. You really need to work in an interdisciplinary way. And this is something I know the university wants to encourage. But what the arts are very good at is communicating, consolidating, and celebrating ideas. And this is where they can work with others, other professionals, other situations to bring these into the public domain and make impact. When there's a problem, I always think it's those who are most affected by the problem who have the best information about it and are probably trying to fix it, but may not have the expertise or the resources to do that. So the arts and creative facilitation are very good means of drawing out these ideas so that we can work with art at a local level, not art, the arts, a creative approach, I would say, at a local level as a way of exchanging and pooling ideas and knowledge. And so everyone can bring whatever their particular experience, they can bring their particular perspective to it and create an outcome that is so much more than if it had been addressed from the outside by an expert from the outside. So I've been engaged in this sort of work for many decades outside of academia, but this approach translates extremely well into knowledge exchange and research. And one of the reasons I've come into university is in order to pass these skills on in teaching. So the aim of making a difference, as I said, translates very well into impact. And then in that sense, it relates very well to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As Kurt said, we could probably address any of those goals through the arts. The Active Energy Project was one that started just with a small arts commission, initially about a question about the experience of older people not feeding into the technological development. And I met the geezers, a group of older men who used to meet in at an Age UK centre, and basically asked them what technology would help them or their community that they'd like to see development. You just have to ask the question sometimes. You have to be open-minded and ask the question. They chose tidal power. I had to say I knew nothing whatsoever about it, but I would take it every step of the way that I can. One of the good things about the arts is it doesn't really have any remit beyond making meaning, or at least bringing together the meanings of others. So I brought together many different professionals on this project. We had engineers, we were working with NGOs, we were working with environmental organisations. And over the years, we not only developed some ideas for tidal turbines and where we could put them on the Thames, but we also engaged with university projects. We were involved in the Hydro Sistership project. We worked with schools, we discovered that there's very little in the school curriculum that deals with sustainable energy. So I had engineers going into school classrooms and children learning about aerodynamics and learning about making their own turbines. You know, one of the issues that is good about the arts is that it's thinking and developing through making and doing. And that's what works in education, involving children, involving students in making. So both the geezers, this group of older men who mentored the children, who made their turbines, and we created an exhibition that showed how they could be used on the Thames Barrier. We created a turbine for the roof of the Age UK Centre, and over 12 years in the end, we not only contributed to university projects, did joint presentations, we collaborated with a seniors group in Pittsburgh, we produced floating water wheels to provide aeration for rivers, and the last one, it was installed in the Queen Elizabeth Park. And along the way, won various awards. Oh, could I have the next slide, please? Various awards, and in fact, even won the Times Higher Education Award for Knowledge Exchange. So through this project, the development goals we met were one, number 3, good health and well-being, because through this project, the geezers recorded improvements to their mental health and to their health and well-being in terms of how they saw themselves in the world, making a difference. Number 4, education. This work was, the work we did in the schools became embedded in the curriculum for the future. Number 11, sustainable cities and economies, because we were looking at ways to use renewable energy in a particular location in a city to provide power for the older community so they could heat their homes, and lastly for climate action, which is number 13. Have the next slide. Through that work, so there were some other academics who were involved with environmental scientists in India who were trying to solve the problem of how to reintroduce lost knowledge of water conservation into the villages in Rajasthan. And they were at a loss because they were going around the villages and giving talks about it, and people weren't really taking it on board. And then one of the academics I'd worked with on the previous project basically said, well, we need the arts. And through this project, not myself, but I've involved artists in India, and they, one of the projects was they worked with children who then gained that knowledge from their grandmothers. It was a lost generation of knowledge, and put that into shadow puppet plays that went around the local schools. So they were teaching the next generation about the water conservation knowledge that had been lost. And another artist worked on in a village with traditional mural painters who painted the narrative of what happened to the water, how they used to be able to conserve it, and then what happened next, and then how to reintroduce it. And that also got translated into a scroll, because there is a tradition in Rajasthan of storytelling whereby a storyteller will at night will work along a mural or a scroll and with a light and tell the story on the scroll. So that went round the villages as well. Can we have the next? Oh, that one I just say number 6, clean water and sanitation, and number 13, climate action. This next one then, a completely different project, working with planners and geographers and the Town and Country Planning Association. We were looking at how the arts has fed into the notions of community-led planning over the years, and that has all been brought together into an archive and a timeline that people can now use, so that they can use it in terms of when new developments are being made. So then that's number 11, sustainable cities and economies. So those are just a range of research projects, some of which have involved students, but all of which involve skills that actually can be passed on to students. And that is what I would like to see more of in this university. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you, Vesna. Yes, thank you so much, Lorraine. Thank you, Helen, for changing the slides and doing it, even though you tried to repress your bad cough. I think what people can see already is that what the previous talkers have described is something which is at the heart of the Middlesex way, which is we're very much a practice-oriented institution, and we're finding ways of ensuring that practice is embedded into the curriculum in order that students learn how to do as well as how to think. And I think Vesna now will pick up on that and demonstrate how her students are also using that practice focus to ensure that the SDGs are meaningful, and we can project that work with impact in the world beyond. Thank you, Vesna.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Lorraine and Helen. And just to say that I'm sort of quite humbled to speak alongside both of you, because in a way it feels like what I'll be saying is a little bit like a work in progress in comparison to the work you both of you have been doing for I think quite much longer. I'll just say as an introduction that the way I come into the way I'm working with students in my capacity. So I'm a senior lecturer in film production. I do lecture in documentary film. I'm a program leader for BA Film at the moment. The way I come into this topic, if you like, is if you like from the perspective of sustainable pedagogies. And I think it's been from the point of joining Middlesex University 6 years ago that I've just been immediately trying to find ways of bridging these different elements of our professional lives. So there is a little bit of a personal and maybe selfish, if you like, perspective from which I'm entering this. But it was important to figure out a way in which, from a pedagogical perspective, right, how do you work as a pedagogue and as a researcher? How these different personas and different streams of each of our works sort of come together. So I will talk about specific projects, some of which have been completed, some are ongoing. I probably won't be addressing the sustainable goals as directly as Lorraine just did, but I'd be happy to come back to that in the conversation later. Yes, Helen, if I can have the first slide, and it would be the project that you and I led together. So there was a project happened in 2021-22, and Helen and I were academic leads for this project. And the project came through a Changing the Culture initiative that Helen already spoke about. So we were, in a way, we were partnering at the time with two organizations. One was Why Me, a restorative justice provider, and the other is Barnett Menkup. And together with them, we were developing a project on that would, in a way, explain, that would introduce the concepts of restorative justice to individuals with learning disabilities and/or autism. And the way we went about doing that was by bringing in another partner, and I don't have the logo here. It's the Fixation Academy. So there is the acting academy that, the acting group that works with people with learning disabilities and or autism. So between all of us, there was a team of students who worked with us on this project, and we developed 4 scripts for 4 films, tackling different aspects that people could recognize in the context of sort of hate crime and how that comes about. It was a wonderful collaboration, wonderfully collaborative work that then involved translating a lot of the documents, for example, that we would use in film into an easy read document so that all the participants could access it. I'm also happy to say and happy to share, if people are interested, the films we have created at that point. So first they won an award. We won Screen Skills Award in 2022 for promotional film. But I also just checked before this webinar. And the films that we created then are still on the websites of both our partners. And we have followed up at few instances with our partners, and we understand that the films are still continuously being used, which is, again, a great example of a kind of impact that we can maybe follow, which is sometimes very difficult, especially when it comes to arts. There is also a publication that Helen and I co-wrote about this project. So again, if there is anything else or further you would like to know, we'd be happy to share that as well. Could I have a next slide, please? Right. So this is something that another project that came through from the nursing department. So it was a collaboration between ACI, academic leads for ACI, were myself and Magnus Moore. And Shauna Colin Murphy was leading the project from the nursing department side of things. So we've created, it was a project funded by Public Health England, and it was a project about psychosis. So the brief was to create a short VR film for psychosis that would be then used in teaching in teaching for nurses. And I am in touch with Shauna and happy to say that this film is indeed being used still. And there is a YouTube version of the film. If people would be interested in seeing that again, I would be happy to share that as well. There is what was really wonderful with this project as well was the way the collaboration worked, because it was a totally Middlesex project, if you like, but there were so people from nursing were involved. There was a number of us from ACI, but the range of students that were involved was also really interesting because we had PhD students as well as BA film students, so students on BA, on PhD, so on different levels of their study, combined with these with academics from different areas working together and sort of co-creating something that is still actively used in teaching. So that is another one. Again, I'm aware of time, so I don't want to give too many details. I would be happy to return with anything else or specific you would like me to say about these later. But I just want you to give a sense of the kinds of things, kinds of collaborative things that we are involving ourselves in. Can I have a next slide, please? Okay, so this is a project you can see Kurt on the slide on the bottom right from where I'm standing. So the Barnett Windrush interviews is an ongoing project, and it involves creating an oral history archive with members of the Windrush generation from Barnet. So far, we have recorded 10 interviews. They have been exhibited recently in Middlesex as part of the Windrush Stories project. We are planning a next exhibition of the same work as part of London Festival of Architecture, which will happen in a number of libraries in the borough. That is to happen in June. And is something that I am sort of quite proud of, and we are probably going to continue doing until we find a place for the archive, an online place for the archive, and the current state of the project, if you like, is precisely around that, ways in which this archive can be meaningfully shared with an audience. At the moment, this is the archive that I have access to, my students have access to, BACA, our community partners have access to. BACA stands for Barnet African Caribbean Association. And all the interviews we have been recording so far were with the members of BACA. I'm probably forgetting something very important to say about this project, but I'll leave it for now. It was, again, a very meaningful intergenerational dialogue between the members of the Windrush generation and my students. There was a lot of the students who were part of this project, which was also amazing, and I look forward to it continuing next year. And the final project I would like to mention now is a project in its initial stages. So I have been in touch with the Age UK Barnet and with their Dementia Day Club, and we've run a few test sessions of mixing in the attendees of the day club with a few of my students. So what would happen, there would be a group of my students coming with cameras, and we would be teaching people in the film club to film. The idea behind this project is, again, the pushing this idea of co-creation to the idea of shared camera, so that it's not in our context, it's not the filmmaker's role to present anyone else. It is going to be down to the people to present themselves. So I'm working currently with the idea of a shared camera. And it's been again a really interesting exchange. These have been incredible sessions, I think, in which both my students and then the attendees of the Dementia Day Club learned a lot. It's been an incredible dialogue, similar to the Windrush project, incredible intergenerational dialogue. And again, something that's in still initial stages, and I look forward to continuing it. So I'll stop here, but I'm happy to return to any of the projects, maybe more directly in
Thank
respect to
you
the
very much.
sustainable goals. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vesna. Maybe we could put the second slide up, just have it up whilst we're all on screen, just to remind us which SDGs we're actually referring to and have been referring to through the presentations. Thank you all three for those presentations. What really strikes me is how Middlesex likes to think of itself as a practice-oriented university, and actually this is what it really means. These are the kind of engagements which really exemplify that practice orientation, and making sure that that gets embedded into the way in which our students learn about the world, but also in which our students learn to engage with the world. All three projects have intergenerational aspects to them. In other words, our students go out into the world, experience other generational attitudes and approaches, and then they are guided by staff into a co-production and co-creation exercise, which delivers, in essence, more than the sum of the parts. I note that Lorraine at one point said, what's really important is that we ask what questions need to be addressed by the community. In other words, we don't go with a predetermined agenda. And in the reality, that's what the SDGs are about. It's a toolkit for us to try and interpret the world around us and the needs in the world around us. And that, in actual fact, by doing that, we are upholding that idea that of Middlesex as an anchor institution. If we really go out and find what communities need and we respond to that, that's really giving life to the idea that we're an anchor institution. So I wanted to begin on that with our guests. Maybe I can start with you, Helen. That idea that it's really important to understand need. It's not for us to go out and essentially tell the world what we think, but rather find from the world what they need, and we respond to that using this methodology. And that's a really useful practice. And in a way, it's something which it's not unique to Middlesex, of course, but it's something we have a long history of. Is that something that you feel like, Lorraine, is fundamental to the way in which we prosecute these projects?
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to think about it because, I think as the kind of institution we are, we're not about having, researchers who have a very kind of specific agenda and then fulfill their research through working in quite an isolated and focused way. I think for the kind of projects that we've done, you sometimes, somebody will approach you and say, we've got this issue, or we've got this kind of project that we want to do. Can you help us? Or it comes from the students themselves. So the first example I showed, a walk in the park, came directly from students telling us that they don't feel safe in the local environment. And so it's partly about enabling their voices, but then it's also about how we can, as a university, facilitate those relationships with local service providers, local law enforcement, local government, to try and make those things happen. But I would also say with this is and I think this was really, really key in the project that Vesna showed that we worked on together with Barnet MenCap, was there was a genuine sense of us wanting and needing to learn alongside the students. So we are not setting ourselves up as the experts here. And Lorraine, you talked about this as well, but there are things that we don't know. We can't speak on the behalf of people with autism and learning disabilities who are the target audience of that project. We don't occupy that same space. So that way in which you collaborate and the way that you shift, you know, we bring our knowledge as filmmakers, but we had to shift and reposition that around working with a particular demographic. But I think one of the most refreshing things was we're learning alongside our students and we're learning alongside the people making this film. And it really changed my approach to filmmaking. That the project, I think, will, you know, I will be forever changed by that. It was such a rewarding experience.
I suppose the other thing, Lorraine, because you talked about interdisciplinarity, and of course, if you're working in an interdisciplinary way, it is impossible for you to be an expert in all disciplines. Therefore, you need to somehow subvert your own ego to work across disciplines. I mean, dare I say, as professor at Middlesex, we need some more subversion of egos across the university in order that we can work in an interdisciplinary way so that we can meet the needs that the SDG are encouraging us to meet as a university.
Indeed, I'm always working on projects where I feel I know nothing, or I'm working with people like I'm working with planners, or I'm working with engineers, and so I'm learning an awful lot, I have to say. But I'm always in this position where I know very little, and also I'm often working with people who know that they want to use the arts. They've got a sense that the arts will be useful, but they're not quite sure how. And people can have a very stereotyped notion of what the arts can do, because people don't know. Why should they? They know about painting and drawing, and why should that make a difference? So you have to find ways of engaging and negotiating and working. You know, I think it's as challenging to work with other people in other disciplines as it is to work with people in the community. We all have our limits to our knowledge and we all have our assumptions. But, you know, again, that's a skill which I think you can teach. And when I teach social practice, when I've had the opportunity to teach it, I'm always sending students into situations that they don't know about to listen, you know, I always say that don't go and do a project, as Helen just said, you know, you don't just go with an idea of a project, you go and listen, and then you sort of suggest, you know, if you're a creative person and if you have some creative skills, then you're likely to discover ways you think that something you offer can help. Perhaps what you can offer doesn't help, and therefore that's not a good situation. You might as well just go into a different situation. But I always think that learning that negotiation and that patience, and not jumping to the end idea. Any of us who teach art or teach creative work in any way are always telling students, don't jump to the end idea. You know, before you actually, don't have the idea first. Ask questions first, but in whatever way.
It's interesting you put it like that, Lorraine, because one of the words that you haven't mentioned, but which is implicit in what you're saying, in the way in which you're trying to encourage students to see the world, is leadership. And of course, lots of the students who come to Middlesex do not see themselves as natural leaders, but actually the SDGs are demanding that we think hard about how we engage with the world. And if you're a graduate, you essentially are on the pathway to some form of leadership in whatever space. I don't mean political leadership, I mean whatever space you occupy. So Vesna, I'm wondering with your projects whether you've seen that transition where students start thinking they have a small voice and very little to contribute, and then realize that through this interaction, through this co-production, that actually they can take the lead as well as co-produce. So in other words, we elevate our students through this engagement with the SDGs into being leadership and citizens.
Yes, in short, yeah, I've seen it. I'm just wondering whether I can give you like a very, very specific example. And I think I have seen like only with the use of VR, if you like. I remember that from this group of students who were working, because VR wouldn't be something that they would be doing in film, but I think that VR project was directly to blame, if you like, directly responsible to one major project that we had this year. So one like dissertation project that somebody is doing. And with another VR project that I know one of our former graduates is doing. So I have seen that. Yes, I've seen that introduction into whatever was part of that project, and because for quite a few reasons, as Helen was saying, sort of we are learning alongside the students, so there is a level of our vulnerability that's sort of part of that students can then pick up on as something that's not a bad thing, but a good thing. And it's something that does empower them to sort of to step in and do something. So there is a different level of sharing. There's also something to be said, and I wonder whether that's going to be part of this conversation and whether that's like a follow-up. A lot of the projects that we've been mentioning don't quite sit within the curriculum. And what makes them interesting is the fact that you work with a small group of students. So it's very difficult to think of projects that have this level of social impact, as a lot of the examples we've been addressing, but that can be rolled out for the whole cohorts. So there's a challenge for us that we may want to talk in this context, but maybe not today. Yes, but I have seen, and it is, I think, by the virtue of working with students in these small groups and in the context in which the roles are mixed. There are no experts. There's just people facilitating these different aspects of what needs to happen. Or if you like, everybody comes with different expertise, or realize that they already bring a level of expertise just by virtue of coming from a certain background or a certain lived experience, that your lived experience is already something that allows you an expertise on some level. Yes, but for sure, that definitely empowers the students to then take on roles in their future projects.
Of course, we work in a university which has is stressed with resources. We're working with staff who are stressed with resources, stressed with time. So I want to come back to what Helen said at the very beginning, was that it's really important that you try and work, notwithstanding what you've just said, Vesna, that you try and work within the curriculum to create briefs where student and staff can work within the framework. And with the Lou Learning Framework, we have that framework available to us in order to come up with that level of engagement with external actors, which can be reflected in the curriculum. And I suspect, Helen, you're going to say that it's really important that we continue to do that, but we do it with others across the university. I know Christopher's on the webinar. Christopher, of course, in business and law, has done an awful lot of work with entrepreneurship to get students involved in projects within Barnet, sustainability projects. And so it seems incumbent upon us to try and build bridges across faculties in order that other faculties too can engage with the arts to propagate what it is that they want to propagate, but within the context of a more robust curriculum. Helen.
Yeah, I think also picking up on what Vesna was talking about, and Lorraine also framed her projects around research as well, is that there are different levels of risk. And in terms of embedding it into pedagogy, there's different approaches to that. So the kind of things that Lorraine and Vesna were just talking about are projects that perhaps have a more research or knowledge exchange focus, because it involves sustained period of thinking through ethical frameworks, working with smaller groups. They're perhaps more time demanding than some of the other projects that we've talked about today. And I think it is about kind of managing, looking at where that attention is required, where there's bigger levels of risk. However, there are loads of projects that we've done that we've rolled out across a whole cohort of BA film students or whole cohort of graphic students, where the risk is actually minimal, because the teaching and learning is very much embedded there already. It's about signposting resources, for example, other campaigns that they might want to look at. And then in terms of getting the work out there, there is no risk to doing that. The work doesn't have to reach a public audience if it's not ready to do that, or we can then offer further support to say, if you were just to reframe this or think a little bit more about the campaign language there, this would be ready to share with community partners. And I think that's where, with changing the culture, we've been able to scaffold that a little bit more. But I think, I think it's right, when you're working with social justice issues, or, with work that has a externally facing audience, it's really important that we get those things right. But it's looking at that level of risk and how we manage it across the kind of projects that we do.
Lorraine, do you feel we're making the most of our assets when it comes to trying to encourage the university as a whole to think hard about how we engage with external stakeholders, but do it in a way which is manageable for staff and students?
No. In short, I think there's a lot we can do. Would you like me to suggest some things?
Yeah, please. You've only got 2.5 minutes, but we've only got 2.5
I'll
minutes
suggest
left.
them very quickly.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it would be fantastic if the university could support courses which very specifically address these issues for practitioners. I'm teaching an MA cohort at the moment, which is fine, but they're not doing what it is I'm teaching them. They're doing something else. I'm just giving them a sort of an academic introduction to the fact that they could work like this. So I would love to see some courses which are where students are actively setting out to use their creative practice to make a difference. We do this across all of ACI, there are so many of us in this faculty who are doing similar work. So the second thing is building and consolidating those connections between us. Now, we've tried to do that through the social practice research cluster that I'm afraid the university then didn't support. We're carrying on.
Bringing it back. We're bringing it back, Lorraine.
Bring it back, yes.
Bringing it back.
Because in a way, what we can do there is we can share our strategies. We can start to do some joint initiatives. We can support each other. As part of that, we can encourage more research students. So I've applied recently for some funding for research studentships and social practice across different art forms. I'd like to see that. And then out of all that, what I would love to see is initiatives such as a new research centre for social practice, social activism, where we can bring together research students, share our teaching initiatives, and do some collective work.
Great, you've made your pitch. You've made your pitch, Lorraine. Heard it. You've made your pitch. Mina, Rabin, you're there as facilitators and conveners. You have willing voices here. I'm sure you have willing voices in the other webinars you're holding as part of these Middlesex conversations. Let's keep that conversation going about interdisciplinarity. Let's keep that conversation going about the ways in which across the faculties we can be talking to each other about how we can use art, as Lorraine says, to finding a way to establish meaning and convey that, because that's what all the speakers today have demonstrated in abundance, that they've found ways of creating meaning and conveying that in a co-production way with student, staff and external stakeholders. And I think that's a really important message for today, that this is not work we can do alone. So the challenge is laid down to you to make sure that you facilitate and convene those people who are willing to do the work. I think we're just coming up to time, so I'll hand back to Mina.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to the panelists, Helen, Vesna, Lorraine. Really appreciated all your insights and expertise. It was lovely to hear about all the projects that we are working on through collaboration and student impact. I'm myself an alumni from Middlesex, and I know how important it is to embed the students in active work, not just academic study. So really lovely discussion. I'm having a look at the Q&A section. It doesn't seem that we had any questions from the attendees on there. So if everyone is okay, we can log off at this point. Christiana, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to say as well, thank you for the panel as well. And the whole point about doing these webinars as well is just giving people a voice. When you look at Rajasthan projects, people have had a voice there, and that was fantastic. But also the guiding principles, when you look at misogyny work as well. And ACI certainly got a place to play in when it comes to working with the SDGs. Over to you, Mina. And shall we
you,
end it
Robin.
there?
Thank you, Robin. Yes, Christiana, if we can just finish the recording, and then if we can open for the attendees if they'd like to, just say hello to the panelists, and we can finish here.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop recording, but our attendees that we've still got, I'm going to invite you right now to screen. No pressure.